Have you ever walked away from a conversation, even after saying everything you meant to say, with the unsettling feeling that you somehow lost? Have you ever felt that tight knot in your throat, as if every word spoken only pulled you further away from your own strength? Maybe you move through rooms filled with loud voices, people who interrupt, mock, dominate, wearing arrogance disguised as confidence. And maybe, deep down, you believe that staying quiet was weakness, that not defending yourself was surrender, that not reacting meant you had been defeated. But what if all of that is an illusion? What if the real power has never been in the words you speak, but in the ones you withhold? Nietzsche, one of the most misinterpreted thinkers in history, saw a truth that most people today still cannot face. Those who talk too much reveal too much. Those who feel the need to convince have already placed themselves at a disadvantage. The world teaches us that every conversation is a battlefield, that we must fight, argue, explain, prove our point, defend our identity, as if losing an argument meant losing ourselves. But nature, in Nietzsche's sense, suggests something far more subtle, far more dangerous, and infinitely more intelligent. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is presence. Silence disorients. Silence destabilizes. Silence forces the other person to confront themselves. This video is for you, the one who constantly feels ignored, overshadowed, interrupted, invalidated. For you who walks away from discussions drained, with the feeling that no one truly heard what you were trying to say. For you who always ends up as the nice one, the one who keeps the peace, while others take advantage of your calm. Maybe somewhere along the way, you confused silence with submission, with cowardice, with emotional fragility. But today, I will show you something different. That silence can be your most powerful weapon. And that true victory does not come from winning arguments, but from never needing to enter them. Because silence is not the absence of a response. Silence is the final response. And once you understand how silence works, how it shifts the psychological terrain of any interaction, how it reveals who actually has control, you will never enter a conflict the same way again. Get ready to see silence in a new light. Not as retreat, but as strategy. Not as weakness, but as dominance. Not as submission, but as sovereignty. Let's dive into Nietzsche's ideas and uncover how you can master any situation without raising your voice or even saying a single word. Why do we feel such a desperate need to respond, to correct, to defend ourselves, to prove that we are right? Because deep down, we were conditioned to believe that truth must be protected at all costs. That if we remain silent, we are surrendering. That if we don't fight back, we are allowing others to win. But Nietzsche saw this urge for what it truly is. Not strength, but fear. The fear of appearing weak. The fear of not being respected. The fear of being misunderstood. And behind every one of these fears lies the most fragile structure of all. The ego. A sensitive ego that cannot tolerate being questioned. An ego that confuses disagreement with threat. An ego that transforms every conversation into a battlefield, because it cannot endure the idea of being exposed. Nietzsche understood something revolutionary. Most people do not argue to seek the truth. They argue to maintain power. They defend their beliefs not because those beliefs are strong, but because without them, their entire identity collapses. And so, argumentation becomes a shield, a psychological armor that hides insecurity, What does this mean for you? It means that every time you feel compelled to explain yourself, to justify your choices, to argue for validation, you have already stepped into their arena and lost the deeper game. Because the moment you need to justify your position, you reveal that you still depend on external approval. You reveal that your sense of self is not rooted inside you, but in how others perceive you. Nietzsche called this the morality of the herd, the mindset of those who live for acceptance, who adjust their tone, their opinions, their very essence, to fit the expectations of the majority, to be liked, to be approved, to be seen as good. But this craving for acceptance is the very thing that keeps you weak. True strength, Nietzsche said, is not in convincing others, but in not needing to. It is the ability to hold your truth, even when mocked, even when misunderstood, even when rejected. It is the ability to remain unshaken when faced with noise and pressure. What Nietzsche proposes is a different kind of power, a psychological mastery that does not rely on domination or persuasion, but on inner sovereignty. It is the power of staying calm while others lose control. It is the power of not reacting when everyone expects you to. It is the power of silence that forces others to reveal themselves while you remain whole. The game of debate is a stage, and the first to jump into it has already surrendered their center. Nietzsche knew that the reactive mind is a captured mind. The observing mind, that is the dangerous one. The mind that remains silent, because it no longer needs to prove anything. But if you shouldn't react, then how do you exert power? How do you make others feel your presence without saying a word? Nietzsche had an answer. It lies in the figure of the Übermensch, the human who transcends the psychological traps of ordinary existence and rises above the need for approval or explanation. In the next section, we will explore how the Übermensch embodies the strategic use of silence, not as passivity, but as a weapon of authority. Get ready, because from this point on, silence begins to speak. Silence is not just the absence of sound. It is a mirror, and what it reflects is often unbearable. When you choose not to react, you are not simply withholding words. You are forcing the other person to hear their own voice, to confront their own arguments without the comfort of your resistance. And that destabilizes them. Because most people do not speak to express themselves. They speak to protect themselves, to convince themselves, to drown out the emptiness that exists between what they say and who they really are. So when you remain silent, their disguise evaporates. Modern social psychology has already shown this. In confrontational situations, silence is interpreted as judgment. It doesn't matter if you are simply listening. The speaker begins to feel exposed, nervous, threatened. Why? Because without your reaction, without your counterargument, they lose control of the narrative. The human brain enters a state of alert. The amygdala, the center of fear and anxiety, activates. The person begins projecting their own insecurities onto you. Is he judging me? Did he notice the flaw in my argument? Does he see through me? Did I say something stupid? And in this invisible psychological battlefield, silence becomes a blade that cuts without being seen, but always felt. Nietzsche sensed this long before psychology confirmed it. For him, the average human is a slave to their reactions. They operate on impulse. They argue from vanity, not truth. They speak from the fear of being irrelevant. The higher individual, The one who masters themselves does the opposite. They do not react. They observe. They know that every emotional reaction is an involuntary confession, a leak, a revelation of where you can be controlled. This is why silence destroys manipulators. People who thrive on emotional control depend on your reactions to maintain power. Your reaction feeds them, validates them, keeps the psychological game alive. When you do not react, you break the cycle. The manipulator panics. Their strategy collapses. They don't know how to proceed, because your silence gives them no feedback, no information, no emotional entry point. They must face themselves, which is the very thing they fear the most. But silence reaches even deeper. It activates unresolved wounds, old traumas, buried fears. It triggers the terror of abandonment, the memory of rejection, the fear of being irrelevant. Your silence tells the other person, in a language older than words, you are not the center. You do not control me. Your words do not shape me. I do not depend on your validation. For the narcissistic ego, this is intolerable. This is why silence is not passive. It is power. It is the stillness of someone who refuses to be dragged into a battle they never agreed to fight. It is the discipline of someone who knows that the moment they stop reacting, they stop being controlled. But this strength does not come easily, because silence is uncomfortable, not just for others, but for you. It goes against everything you've been taught, against the instinct to defend yourself, against the urge to explain, against the reflex of wanting to be understood. But it is precisely for this reason that silence is transformative. It is mastery disguised as stillness. Now that you understand how silence works inside the mind of the other, how it activates insecurities, breaks defenses, and exposes hidden weaknesses, it's time to go further, to stop being merely someone who understands silence, and become someone who uses it with intention. In the next part, you will learn how to wield silence strategically, how to win arguments, shift power, and reclaim your presence without speaking a single word. Because real power has never been in the noise. It has always been in the one who controls the silence. Get ready. Because from this point on, silence begins to speak. Now it becomes crucial that you understand the difference between strategic silence and submissive silence. Because while one empowers you, the other slowly destroys you from the inside. There is nothing more perverse than being silenced, except being conditioned to believe that silence is your only option. Conditioned to believe that swallowing your anger is maturity, that avoiding confrontation is emotional intelligence, that letting things go is always the noble thing to do. But what if I told you that this is often a trap? That this type of silence is not wisdom. It is disguised surrender. Nietzsche saw this with brutal clarity. What you call peace is often nothing more than domesticated resignation. Look around your life. How many people take advantage of your calmness? How many rely on your tendency to listen, overlook, tolerate, absorb? How many push their ideas, impose their will, occupy your space? Simply because you never push back? And every time, you convince yourself it's not worth it. It's better to avoid conflict. It's not that big of a deal. But it is a big deal. You are paying a monumental price for this false peace. And here's the cruel truth. You are being used exactly because you never react. Nietzsche called this the morality of slaves. A value system designed by the weak, built from guilt, fear, and submissiveness. A system that trains you to shrink, to endure, to stay quiet. And still feel virtuous for it. But Nietzsche did not write for the ones who accept this. He wrote for the ones who dare to break this internal conditioning. For those who realize that they are being exploited. And choose to stop participating in their own suppression. When you accept this kind of silence, the silence that eats you from within, you are surrendering your power without even noticing. You are shaped by the expectations of others. You stop being yourself. You become what others need you to be. And this is the opposite of Nietzsche's greatest principle. The will to power. Because the real will to power is not domination over others. It is domination over yourself. It is reclaiming your voice, your presence, your boundaries. It is being silent not out of fear, but out of sovereignty. This submissive silence must die. And in its place, a new silence must be born. The silence of presence. The silence that does not bow. The silence that does not apologize. The silence that stands upright in the midst of chaos. And changes the course of a situation without uttering a single word. This is the silence Nietzsche would respect. The silence of an individual who has become the master of themselves. But how do you reach that level? How do you transition from being manipulated to becoming the architect of your own presence? How do you kill the herd morality within you and be reborn as someone who commands respect simply by existing? The answer lies in Nietzsche's most powerful figure, the Übermensch. We've already mentioned him. Now it's time to learn how to become him. We've reached the most important point of this entire journey. Perhaps the hardest. Perhaps the most liberating. Until now, you've understood silence as a tool for dealing with other people. How it exposes, disarms, dominates, reveals, and protects. But there is a deeper layer, the one Nietzsche, Jung, and every great thinker pointed toward. Silence is not just a strategy for the world. It is a transformation for the self. Because the real battle was never external. It has always been internal. 1. The silence that reveals who you truly are. Most people speak endlessly because they're terrified of what they'd find if they stopped and listened. External noise is an escape from inner confrontation. But when you choose silence, you hear your intuition. You recognize your fears without running. You notice your masks. You feel your inner strength rising. You see yourself clearly for the first time. Nietzsche said that only in silence can a man hear himself. Jung said that only in silence can a man integrate himself. Both pointed to the same truth. You will never be free while your identity depends on the reactions of others. It is in silence that you draw the boundary between who you are and who the world wants you to be. 2. The silence that kills the domesticated self. Every time you react to please. Every time you speak to avoid conflict. Every time you shrink to keep the peace. You reinforce the trained, domesticated version of yourself. The version taught to never disturb anyone. But something inside you knows. This is not life. This is not truth. This is not strength. Strategic silence kills that conditioned self layer by layer. It forces you to confront your emotional dependence on approval. It is uncomfortable. It is painful. But it is necessary. Because the domesticated self will never live the life you want. 3. The silence that builds presence, not submission. There is a weak silence. A silence that hides, fears, and surrenders. But there is another kind. A silence that bends the room. Changes the emotional climate. And makes people listen before you even speak. This is the silence of someone who owns themselves. Who governs their inner world. Who no longer needs approval or understanding. It is the silence of presence. Presence is not born from words. It is born from inner clarity. And when your clarity becomes powerful enough, your presence becomes impossible to ignore. 4. The silence that rearranges your relationships. Prepare yourself. When you stop reacting, or when you react only with intention, your social life reorganizes itself naturally. Some will respect you more. Some will distance themselves. Some will test you. Some will observe you carefully. Some will admire you. Some will fear you. But everyone will notice that something in you changed. This transformation doesn't need to be announced. It is felt. And the truth is this: emotionally mature and self-aware people will be drawn to your new presence. The rest will drift away. This is the filter you never knew you needed. 5. The silence that becomes your identity. One day, after practicing this long enough, something remarkable happens. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself. You no longer feel the urge to defend your point. You no longer react impulsively. You no longer carry the anxiety of justifying your choices. You no longer collapse under superficial criticism. You no longer obey the expectations of others. Silence stops being a technique. It becomes who you are. A person who acts from their own root, not from external noise. This is the true Übermensch. Not an invincible character, but an individual free from reactivity, from validation, from emotional chains. Someone who does not shout to be seen. Someone who does not beg to be heard. Someone who simply exists, and that is enough. Now I need to ask you, what kind of silence will you choose from this point on? The silence that erases you? Or the silence that elevates you? The silence that suffocates you? Or the silence that strengthens you? The silence that hides your voice? Or the silence that becomes your voice? If you understood everything we explored here, write in the comments. I choose the silence that gives me power. Write it not for me, but for yourself. Because speaking it is the first step toward becoming it. Before you go, remember. The weak shout to avoid looking weak. The strong speak when they choose. The wise speak only when necessary. But the masters? They win without saying a word. Your next video continues this journey of presence, emotional authority, and inner dominance. Don't stop here, you've just begun the path of becoming someone impossible to manipulate.